Agent Friedrichsen stared at the edge in disbelief, uncertain what the nodding, twisting feeling playing havoc with his stomach was. Awe, admiration, abject terror. Maybe it was just run-of-the-mill confusion as to how something like this could even exist. Sure, the world as he knew it was far more expansive than anyone knew, unless they also happened to work for the Foundation. But even with the wealth of anomalies running around, the Earth was still ultimately finite. Not just its resources, but its space, its contents, all the people and places and terrifying monsters that could fit onto one planet had a limit. There'd be a stop to it, a maximum capacity, an edge to the world. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. Dr. Mann's voice should have startled Friedrichsen, the way it cut through the contemplative silence. But despite his ominous words, it was just nice to hear someone say something, anything, while standing at the edge. Nietzsche said that. The Foundation doctor half chuckled, leaning gently with both hands on his cane. Always feels very applicable whenever I come back here. Since 1944, Dr. Ivan Mann had been on more expeditions to the edge than anyone else at the SCP Foundation. 28 years had passed since then. This was his 9th trip. It would also be his last. You get a funny feeling, don't you? The doctor asked, not waiting for the agent to respond. In a way, it was like he wasn't even talking to Friedrichsen. When you look down at it, like you just want to jump, to fall even, if it's just to see if there's anything down there. The call of the void, some people have taken to naming that sensation, comes from a different place depending on who you ask. I once read a theory that it's an evolutionary trait, passed down from our primate ancestors. Supposedly, it's meant to be our minds predicting if we'll be able to jump for the nearest tree branch. Or it could be a trick of the mind, awareness of being high up, making extra sure where we step, so we don't fall. That in turn makes us think we wanted to. Who knows, eh? Who knows indeed. Agent Friedrichsen didn't have an answer. He just kept staring down at the sheer drop, seeing the waters of the Pacific receding into an endless nothing space. It made the agent feel uneasy, sick, as if his very body was rejecting the idea that he was stood at the precipice of where the world just stopped. There was something else too, another feeling buried beneath the twists and knots of his guts. This was a sad place. The idea that the world would keep on turning and keep having more and more to see, but that there was nothing beyond this place. No more, an end to everything, just the void and its call. The SCP Foundation's research into the phenomenon, now designated as SCP-8001, began when a series of documents were transferred between the Foundation and the Horizon Initiative, a group of interest with a penchant for gathering anomalous artifacts and objects. Led by representatives from the 3 major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the initiative's goal is to utilize the relics they uncovered to become closer to God and reshape the world in accordance with their combined principles. The Horizon Initiative maintains an amiable relationship with the SCP Foundation, which was what allowed for the transfer of sensitive documents between the 2 organizations, leading to the discovery of SCP-8001. But before we deep dive into, or rather off the edge of the flat Earth, I have a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that.
So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to the insane Flat Earth SCP discovery. This particular piece of evidence that drew the Foundation's attention was a detailed sea chart created by one Boris Kozlov, a Russian seafarer and engineer born in 1845. The chart itself contained a detailed description of a place that, according to all known records, shouldn't have existed, somewhere that couldn't possibly exist. Throughout human history, the existence of SCP-8001 was thought to have been debunked entirely, since the scientific proof for the spherical shape of the Earth has existed since as early as the 5th century BCE, back during the days of ancient Greece. Despite the Earth's circumference being calculated by Eratosthenes back in the 240 BCE, there has long been numerous fringe groups that still believe the erroneous claim that the world is a flat surface. There even exist debunked accounts from historical explorers who claim to have discovered the edge surrounding the circumference of the world. To be clear, the existence of SCP-8001 doesn't disprove the literal centuries worth of well-documented evidence about the shape of the planet. The Earth is, by all scientifically verifiable methods, not flat. So, how can it have an edge? Well, that's precisely the question that the Foundation's own researchers have been seeking to answer since as early as 1942. After learning about SCP-8001 from Boris Kozlov's chart, the Foundation was uncharacteristically unenthusiastic to explore the location for themselves. Given that the location was presumed to not only be remote, but logically couldn't possibly exist, no expeditions would be made to reach SCP-8001 until March of 1942. A vessel belonging to the Foundation was sailing between Panama and Auckland, New Zealand, when it inadvertently entered the waters surrounding SCP-8001. Reports from the ship itself described a lighthouse, its beams shining from an area where there should have been no land, just miles of open ocean. The following year, further exploration revealed no sign of any landmass in the area where the initial sighting had taken place. That was until Boris Kozlov's chart was rediscovered. It had been left in Foundation storage at Site 19 and widely forgotten about. Now, using it as a rough guide to the area, the Foundation was able to conduct more thorough exploration. Before long, in October of 1943, they discovered what should, by all other accounts, something that did not exist: the Tower of Sunset. The numerous writings scattered throughout history from people who ventured unknowingly to SCP-8001 describe being lost at sea, adrift in stormy waters, only to abruptly find themselves discovering a calmer place in the midst of a tempest. An ancient Roman sailor in 45 CE, a Chinese writer from the 4th century CE, and a 13th century vessel from India are among those thought to have inadvertently made their way to SCP-8001. Those are just the misadventures that the Foundation knows about, and there could have well been other expeditions to the edge of the world that predate their own, that simply have no historical record of them. This is widely attributed to these trips out to SCP-8001 ending in shipwreck. In 1944, the SCP Foundation launched 2 individual voyages in order to reach SCP-8001 and verify the existence of any landmass in the area. One of these expeditions, involving Foundation crew aboard the vessel SCPS Rattlesnake, never made it. The last contact from the ship was able to reach a radio station in nearby French Polynesia, but shortly after the Rattlesnake's broadcast, it was never heard from again. The ship was believed to have capsized in the fatal storm before ever reaching SCP-8001. The second of these expeditions, led by Captain Errol Meyer of the SCPS Windswept, was able to navigate through a passageway that took the ship through the shoals near SCP-8001. The vessel was successfully moored at a small island, known as the Isle of Last Watch. Importantly, there is a distinction between this island and SCP-8001 itself. While the numerical designation of SCP-8001 is used to specifically describe the anomalous edge of the world, the surrounding area is referred to as the Isle of Last Watch. This island is now home to SCP Foundation Site-99, as well as the Tower of Sunset, the lighthouse that was seen from a distance by the initial Foundation vessel that passed through the surrounding waters. Venturing onto the Isle of Last Watch, Captain Meyer was accompanied by a Foundation researcher, Dr. Ivan Mann, head of the contingent of anomalous experts present for the successful 1944 expedition. During a thorough sweep of the island, the researchers quickly discovered SCP-8001. Since this discovery, the geological, geographical, and ontological origin of the edge has remained unknown. The very existence of the edge of the world is considered a logical impossibility, although the Foundation has verified the following to be true. SCP-8001 is not an extra-planar space, nor is it a pocket dimension. The research teams that have been stationed at Site-99 since the initial landing in 1944 have been able to communicate and transfer information digitally through the use of satellites in order to make phone calls. The Isle of Last Watch itself does verifiably exist and can be detected through the use of GPS. Rockets and flares have even been launched from the island, and these have remained visible to those close to SCP-8001's locality. The edge itself has been described as a sheer drop, stretching from north to south, situated in the southern Pacific Ocean. Water from the Pacific has been observed flowing freely into a deep void that remains obscured from vision. Attempting to get any closer to SCP-8001, especially by boat, is extremely hazardous. Unless they are following a specifically charted course through the series of nearby shoals that break up the water's flow, it can be very easy for vessels to get swept up by the rapidly moving currents and carried over the edge. However, provided they are able to maneuver safely through the shoals, ships will arrive safely at a sheltered bay on the far reaches of the Isle of Last Watch. Vessels will be able to leave the island by following the same route in reverse in relative safety, provided they keep the correct passageway. Another factor that causes difficulty with venturing close to SCP-8001 is the substantial level of water vapor that the anomalous edge of the world creates, which leads to low visibility and obscures SCP-8001 from observation. While the Isle of Last Watch itself can be viewed from satellites or overhead cameras, including any launched from within the obscured area of SCP-8001 itself, any attempts to observe SCP-8001 closer by sea will inevitably lead to a shipwreck, and trying to do so by air will cause a craft to become lost or have their visibility impaired by the water vapor, likely leading to a crash. According to the Foundation's own containment protocols for SCP-8001, passage beyond SCP-8001 is not currently believed to be survivable. Individuals who pass over SCP-8001 are considered lost. Exploring the Isle of Last Watch, Dr. Mann and Captain Meyer disembarked from the SCP's windswept onto the island's small bay, on the easternmost part of the landmass. The edge of the island itself consisted of a rocky outcrop rising out of the waters that led to SCP-8001. Cut into these rocks near the bay was a staircase, which the research contingent steadily began to ascend. The northern and central regions of the island mainly consist of flat wooded terrain, with a variety of different plant life growing there, including different types of trees, grasses, and brush not commonly found together. In fact, most were native to continents a considerable distance away from the Isle of Last Watch's location. To the south was a small rocky area that was home to a quiet graveyard. To the west, Captain Meyer observed a narrow outcrop of rock that reached out over the precipice of SCP-8001, with a wooden walkway protruding outward over this outcrop, which could be used to pass over the edge of SCP-8001 without risk of falling. The Tower of Sunset was situated within the flat wooded area in the northern part of the island. Upon closer observation, Dr. Mann and the other researchers were quickly able to determine that the stone structure had been built in multiple conflicting architectural styles. The exterior portions of the tower seemed to be ancient Roman, but throughout the rest of the structure were examples of other influences: 17th century Spain, 5th century China, Britain, the United States, and the Netherlands, with the tower itself being constructed of a mixture of Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and Mesoamerican styles. Dr. Mann surmised that this place had been built gradually, piecemeal, over the course of thousands of years, with every new arrival to the island bringing their own influences as they expanded the structure. The lighthouse itself functions as you would expect, warning vessels of the potential dangers of approaching SCP-8001. It is powered by an 18th century oil lamp and reflector with an automatic relighting system that seems to, at some point, been upgraded using modern elements to keep the beacon lit and refilling its oil automatically by timing when it would be running low. The main floor of the Tower of Sunset appears to be a library, containing a repository of texts that seem to have been gathered over several hundred years' worth of exploration. Each of the journals, logs, charts, maps, and diaries contained within the tower are written in a wide variety of languages from across the world, including those that are no longer spoken. Thus far, the Foundation has uncovered texts in the following languages: Latin, French, Greek, Farsi, English, German, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Korean, Urdu, Portuguese, Amharic, and even a number of writings in pictographic languages, including the Halpul and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The oldest piece in the tower's library is a series of Egyptian tales that date back to as early as 2300 BCE. There exists only one modern electronic digital storage device, an early model of Sony-branded MP3 player. Thought to have been manufactured in 2003, this device is secured within a watertight case. However, it remains completely inoperable. It appears to have suffered irreversible water damage, leading to the working theory that it washed up on the shores of the Isle of Last Watch completely by chance. However, when Dr. Mann and Captain Meyer arrived on the island in 1944, they discovered that they weren't the sole inhabitants of the Isle of Last Watch. Beyond just those who have seemingly discovered the island prior to the Foundation, or who have been stranded or marooned there, Last Watch was home to a sentient metal construct, referred to as SCP-8001-A. This automaton, calling itself anomaly, had seemingly been designed to maintain the lighthouse and its library, and claimed to possess the consciousness of a 16th century French explorer, one of the unfortunate people who had previously been marooned on the island. The construct was operated through a complex combination of clockwork, gears, pistons, and pulleys, which allowed it to move and speak in a way that mimicked human behavior. According to an interview conducted between Dr. Mann and SCP-8001-A, anomaly had been watching the Tower of Sunset for multiple centuries. It explained that the name of the tower had been recorded in various writings stored in the library, and the Isle of Last Watch was a misinterpretation of the engraving on a headstone in the graveyard. It had been the resting place of a man named Jason of Iolcus and read, "Tender of the Last Watch." Someone who had arrived to the island believed the headstone to be a nameplate for the island itself. For now, the SCP Foundation is still yet to understand how to gain access to SCP-8001. As for how the Edge of the World came to exist, why the Isle of Last Watch and the Tower of Sunset are located there, these are still questions researchers seek to answer. When Dr. Ivan Mann later returned to the island in 1948, he once again spoke with SCP-8001-A, who told him, "Maybe there is nothing beyond these falls, Ivan. Maybe this reality is the end of the story. There are so many who believe that to be true, but perhaps it is not back of the book. Perhaps this is just the turning of the page. Perhaps even here at the edge of the world, there are still stories left to be written." Now check out SCP-2317, the Devourer of Worlds, A Door to Another World, and Parasite Planet, SCP-3003, The End of History, for more.